Hi, I'm Dr. Terry James Gingrass, and this is Dr. G's ADHD Chat, a show trying to make the world safe for ADHDers. I'm a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist, and I have been working with ADHD for about 40, at least 40 years. And I also am the father of a couple of ADHD kids who are now adults. And as I frequently say, when my kids were being born, well, ADHD did not exist as a diagnosis, okay? And so we didn't know what the heck we had on our hands and kind of had to stumble through. And I had to do a lot of work in the library and going to workshops and all kinds of stuff to try to find out what the heck I was doing. And we even had a couple of guys I knew very well who were uh, had both had postdocs in pediatric psychology, and I had them evaluate my son, and they, oh, nothing wrong with him. Ha, ha, ha. Anyway, so I'm a neuropsychologist, which means I guess the simplest way is just it's a brain doctor. You do neurologic stuff. You evaluate multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, dementias, traumatic brain injuries, and so on. Anyway, so since ADHD is a neurologic condition, I thought, hey, I should know how to do this. And since I had a couple of my own kids that I was a little concerned about, I wanted to make sure I did it correctly. Now, there's some controversy about testing for ADHD, uh, mostly from people who don't know how to do testing. But uh, our brethren in psychiatry are the most frequent uh, people who argue against doing testing for ADHD, but on the other hand, I get a ton of evaluation requests from psychiatry practices. Most of them are probably from neurologic practices and family practice. But anyway, so I've been doing this a long time, and my notion is that if I do a reasonable amount of testing, I won't miss anything. Okay, now one of the problems about ADHD is, first of all, there's not a specific test that you can, oh, I gave them that, and by gosh, I can tell they've got it. So it's a little trickier, and a lot of times what you're doing is you're ruling out other possibilities. You're ruling out bipolar disorder and anxiety disorder and dyslexia and uh, other things like that that can sometimes look a little bit similar to ADHD. So I'm just going to do a kind of a quick run through what I usually would do, and I'll try not to get too technical because I can't imagine anything more boring for somebody who's not a neuropsychologist than going through a lot of this kind of stuff. But let's just start off. First thing I do when but we'll assume it's a kid for now. Adults are a little different story, but pretty much the same kind of procedures. I do a really thorough family interview. I want I want both parents if I can get them. Most frequently, I only end up with one, but we got a ways around that. But basically, I do a thorough interview and family medical history. I want to know, is there a family history of ADHD? That simplifies my job wonderfully, since it's highly transferable. I mean, it's a genetic condition and it runs in families, and the incidence is very high. Uh, so I want to know about that. I want to know about anything else that might show up as similar to ADHD, and how they're doing in school, where they're are they in special ed, or are they any of that kind of stuff. And so I get a really good family history. Then I usually will schedule testing, and when the parents leave, they go home with a bunch of self-observation forms or observation forms, for both themselves and for the teacher. And so when they come back, they've got those forms that we can score those and we can get some idea of what we're dealing with here. And then we start going through just formal testing. Now, I know ADHD kids don't always have the most patience in the world, and so I don't give them 8 hours of testing. I got enough stuff I could, but I want to get some accurate reflections, not attitude checks. Okay, so what we do uh, is first of all, well, not first of all, we do it in a rough, different order, but I'll just go through it in the way that's easier to understand. Of course, I test for attention. And there are some what are called continuous performance tests that are thought to have some accuracy in testing out ADHD. Thank God they're mostly computer administered nowadays. So you're just pushing the button and watch them, how they react and that sort of stuff. And then the machine automatically scores everything and on you go. And but attention has multiple different kinds of attention. There are multiple, and we test for sustained attention. We test alternating attention. We test divided attention. Can you test switch back and forth between different categories of information and so on? So on all of those, okay. They call it attention deficit disorder. That's not exactly the most accurate way to look at it, but it you want to have a good load of attention stuff. Then you want to look at how memory works for them. Verbal and visual are roughly the huge categories. And so you want to get a measure of that. And I don't give them the detailed, 2.5 hour test. I give them, well, a lot of times it'll just be a verbal learning test and a visual design memory test. And that is helpful in diagnosing, and you want to make good observations while they're doing the work. Are they paying attention, or do you have to keep redirecting them? Are they, bouncing the pencil and looking out the window and everything else, but paying attention to what you're wanting them to do? And then there's a lot of language stuff. The Some of the things you're doing are like verbal fluency. You try to, okay, I'm going to give you 60 seconds. I want you to tell me as many words as you can that are, uh, you know, fruits, that sort of thing. And there's a basic aphasia screening exam that most everybody still uses. Then we go to visual spatial stuff. Visual spatial is a little bit, uh, actually, ADHDers are usually pretty good at visual spatial stuff. They kind of like that structure that a picture gives them. So you give them a few different kinds, and there are tons of uh, different kinds of, well, in all these categories, there are tons of different measures in all of these categories, and they have people who really are fond of one particular one, or nobody uses them all. I mean, there's just no way. Uh, but usually, you'll get a few that you have either you probably learned to use in your residency or so on, and you pretty much stay with those and you learn the ins and outs of them, so you know what's going on. Oh, look at that error! I haven't seen that one before. That's those are gold. Okay, so uh, language, visual spatial, and visual spatial is interesting in the sense that there are some measures there that are pretty rough to do, but usually ADHDers do pretty well with that. And you have to keep it flowing. You have to keep it going. Can't be sitting around and say, well, no, when you can't be boring. You've got to be pretty businesslike and on your game, and you'll end up with a pretty good picture, I think. You also want to do some measures of complex reasoning, problem solving, that kind of thing. Usually ADHDers are pretty good at that stuff. They uh, are pretty good problem solvers usually. Matter of fact, a lot of times they get intrigued by it and want to do more. Do you get any more of those, Doc? I'd like to do that. And then I mean, you'll give some kind of a measure of intellectual functioning, something that gives you an IQ. Uh, and, you can give the whole I mean, there are big tests with 10 or 12 subtests that you give, or I usually just, give one that's got 4 or 5 subtests and gives me a few measures in both sides. I'm looking at left hemisphere versus right hemisphere kind of stuff. And sometimes, not all the time, I'll give some basic achievement tests, reading level and that sort of thing. Depending, a lot of times on what the parents are coming in with as major problem areas. Because sometimes, you have to determine that its problems are not from a learning disability. And that of course, is pretty uh, complicated with an ADHD kiddo. And it depends on when you get them. If you get them early, not too much of a problem. But if you get them later, when they've had 4 or 5 years, in their fifth grade or something like that, they've had some experiences with school and they're not fans. And so a lot of times you have to motivate them. And that's, of course, you are writing it down, observations, or your test administrator is writing them down. Uh, so, so you've got IQ measure, you've got achievement measures, and then you usually will do some kind of a simple measure of age appropriate measures of anxiety, depression, uh, just to be complete. And, those have to be incorporated with your test observations too. Are they looking, oh man, I don't know if it's anywhere else but in here? And you have to, pay attention to that. And you have to, are they unmotivated? Are they, that all has an impact on your stuff, but then they're also, even if they hated doing it, everything, what did they really perk up on and really do a bang up job on? That's that's gold, actually. That's what you live for. You want to see that. So basically, if you do this, basically what I've got is you've not only ruled in the possibility of ADHD, but you've ruled out a bunch of other things, and that's a lot of what you need to do. Because they come in, excuse me, they seem to be brighter than normal, but they're not doing well in school, and the parents don't know what's going on, and the teacher. Well, it depends. The teachers, there's a high range. Some of them have ADHD kids of their own, and they are very sensitive to what your child is going through and da da da, supportive and all the rest of it. By the way, when you have your child study meeting, it's important to have talked with the teachers in your neighborhood or whatever and find out who's good with ADHD, because some teachers are just great with ADHD and some don't do very well with ADHD or any other threat to their authority. But the ones that are good at it are gold, and you need to be aware of that. And you need to also be aware that in a child study meeting, you can request a specific teacher, which most of the administrators would just assume you didn't know and weren't aware of. Okay, so basically, these you've given all these tests, and now it's kind of a matter of checking things out. First there are the things that are mostly left hemisphere and the things that are mostly right hemisphere. The language stuff is mostly left hemisphere. The visual spatial stuff is mostly right. If you've done so many manual dexterity things, um, the uh, that lateralizes as well. I'm sorry about this cough. I think I have inherited the flu, or maybe it's a cold. I don't know. It's not comfortable though. Anyway, so when you're interpreting, you're putting things in different categories, and you're saying, okay, in this area, we're looking really good. The more complicated it is, the better his attention is. Okay, so uh, he's bored basically. He's sick of having to go through the same crap at the beginning of every semester, every year. Uh, and he probably needs a more stimulating environment. You can tell a lot from evaluation that, like I'm describing, it gives you pretty much every area of the brain is that we're concerned about in school anyway is covered. Uh, and there's always more depth. There's always more you could give, but you have to figure out as a clinician how much is enough. What do you need to make the call that you have to make, and then from that you can some things you should consider. If you're a clinician writing your report, you should be considering what kind of recommendations you're going to make, particularly to the parents, but also to the school system, because they're going to get a copy of this, and they want to know what you expect them to be doing. Uh, Hopefully, you have some kind of a reasonable arrangement with the school system in your area, or the school systems in your area, and so that they know that you know what you're talking about, and that you will be checking up to make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's a ideal situation, and one of the things you've got to remember as parents, and this is sometimes difficult, when you feel like your child's being picked on by the system, but by and large, most of the teachers are really trying hard. They chose this career field, and they have some reasons for doing that. And hopefully it squares with what your kiddo needs. And you're much better off if you can work with them than trying to bulldoze over them and have a whole big confrontation kind of thing. Because that very rarely works out to anybody's benefit. So you've got this test battery that's been given. You've got the summary and results and the recommendations from your clinician. And then the next thing is this, you have started an evaluation process at the school, presumably. If you haven't, you should. Okay, you need to set up a child study. You can do that, and I would recommend you do it with a letter that's dated, because some schools let themselves get really backed up and don't get around to doing these things till the school year is almost over, and that doesn't help anybody. Especially it doesn't help your child. So you have a letter, a dated letter that you've sent to the principal, and requesting a full evaluation or a child study meeting for your kid, and explaining that you've already gone and gotten the evaluation on your insurance. You can wait and say, I think we got a problem here, and have the school pay for it. I've done both. Whatever floats your boat in that case. Uh, but anyway, you've at some time there's going to be a child study meeting, and they're going to have the report from the clinician. And from that, they can determine what would be appropriate. Hopefully, the clinician has recommended some accommodations that would be helpful for your child. And you got to remember, I don't want to say that some people don't care, but I will say that I've had patients that had been in school all year long, and their classroom teacher didn't even know that they had accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act. I mean, it's like, what? So how can this kid get any kind of accommodations if the teacher doesn't even know that there's a plan? It's somewhat, well, it's rare, I hope. I've seen it sometimes, and it's somebody I've worked with, and what's going on? How are they doing? Da 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 da. But oh, by the way, did you know that the teacher didn't even know your child had accommodations? Had a 504 plan? So you've got to, you don't need to be, cracking the whip, but you need to be aware of what's going on and make sure that everybody who's important to your kid is in the loop. They know you, and they know your child, and they know that your child has had some special accommodations uh, that are specifically designed to improve his academic experience. Okay, I am Dr. Terry James Gingras. This is Dr. G's ADHD Chat, the show trying to make the world safe for ADHDers. I I do coaching for ADHD. I'm not doing much therapy anymore. And if you go to my website, which is terrygingrassphd.com, I have a Calendly program. If you're not familiar with that, it does scheduling. And we can do a pre-treatment evaluation just to see if we can work together, and it would be helpful for your child or yourself. I do adults as well as kids, and I have been doing this a long time, so I have seen things I never would have imagined. Okay, and we will catch you on the next show, and let's remember it's on us to make the world right for an ADHD kiddo. Thank you.